Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's daily dose of scripture is going to be on Ezra chapter 2 verse 62. Now, you might be confused why I want to make a video on this, but you're going to find out soon. It reads, "These sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but they were not found. Therefore were they, as polluted, put from the priesthood." Okay, so what's the context to this? Basically, the Jews were coming back from exile, and they were, trying to set everything back up. They wanted, rebuilding Jerusalem and so on, and they were rebuilding their priesthood, right? So they wanted to keep the same process as before, where you had to be a Levite in order to serve. So, and because of how much time had passed, they were basing it on their records, genealogies, and so on. So people who they could trace back to that Levitical lineage were able to serve in the priesthood. But there were others who thought that they were part of it, so they also went into the application. But that couldn't be found. And so they did not want to take that risk of, they didn't want to have any guesswork when it comes to this. So they just didn't allow them. So what I want to highlight, so let me just add another thing here that, they were trying to reset the priesthood and only allowed those whose connection to the Levitical tribe could be confirmed. So what I want to focus on here is the fact that, you see, when you're doing spiritual things like the priesthood, something that you want God to endorse, you have to follow the rules, okay? When you break the rules, this isn't like, God isn't like a human being who, because the human being actually needs that thing, they can be like this. God doesn't need anything from us, okay? God does not need anything from us. If you read Acts chapter 17, verses 24 to 28, and other passages. So when he sees that things are not being done according to his plan, according to the way he said it, he doesn't depend on it, so he's just going to say, no, it's not acceptable. Okay? So things have to be done exactly as they are prescribed in order for him to accept it. Okay? And there's several examples of this in Scripture. You see God lashing out at the sons of Aaron because Aaron's sons sacrificed something that was not according to the laws of God. Okay? As an example. You see that God killed Uzzah because he touched the ark of God when he was not qualified to do so. And this was a pain to David because it was the vibe was excellent. Everybody was moving towards where David wanted to place the ark. There was celebration, and then all of a sudden God, quote unquote, spoiled it by killing somebody as all that was happening. So, David didn't like it. But as far as God is concerned, rules are rules. If I say only Levites are supposed to touch it, only Levites are supposed to touch it. Okay? And if you want God to be involved in your life, or if I want God to be involved in my life, the rules that he has set have to be kept diligently. Okay? God is not a human who will be lenient with rules. If you read, for example, Numbers chapter 23, verse 19, right? When he sets those things. Now, you say, oh, well, for example, David committed adultery with Bathsheba. You're supposed to die for adultery. David didn't. So, yes. Because at the same time, while I'm saying that when God sets rules for us, he wants us to keep to those rules. When he sets a rule, he himself does not have to keep to it. So let's just keep that in mind. Okay, if God says that the person who commits adultery should die, that doesn't mean that if he wants to spare somebody, he can't. He can't, because he's God, right? Remember Romans chapter 9, verse 20. We cannot judge God by his own rules. He can decide, because he's not making the rules for himself. He's making the rules for us so that we don't commit adultery or kill ourselves and so on. Not because he doesn't have a right to do what he wants. So, but what I was saying earlier is that when God says, okay, if I'm going to be a part of this, then it has to be done this way. We as humans have to do it that way if we want God to be involved. Okay, now these are ancient examples. How is this relevant for us? Well, there are rules to some of the things that we engage in. Marriage, for example. There are rules, okay? Rules regarding how the woman should relate with the man. The Bible paints this picture that the wife looks up to her husband, obeys her husband. Paul says, wives, submit yourselves unto your husbands. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, we used to get the same hierarchy of obedience, that the man, he has to take charge of his wife. He has to take care of his wife, okay? And there are rules regarding how that process works. Like, for example, in Numbers chapter 30, we see an example where if a woman has a vow or something she wants to talk to God about, the process is the man, if he approves of it, then the prayer becomes valid, but if he doesn't, then it doesn't. So, and so on. So, the point is, if you want your marriage to be endorsed by God, to be blessed by God, such rules have to be followed. The woman has to know her place and abide by. The man has to know his place and abide by. If the woman becomes presumptuous or the man becomes effeminate, then God is not going to be present in that marriage. And that's when divorce happens. That's when all kinds of bad things happen. Irresponsible children are more likely to be produced in such marriages. So God is present in places where his rules are obeyed, where his voice is a priority in that place, in that family, in that marriage, wherever it is. Okay, there are rules. Same thing with if you want to be a pastor. It's not anybody who can be a pastor, just as it wasn't anybody who could be a Levitical priest. There was an age bracket. There was you had to be able-bodied, you had to be clean. Similarly, if you're a pastor, there's certain qualities you need to have, right? If you want to be a pastor, you have to not love money. And what that means is you should be able to live without having any money. Doesn't mean you won't eat. It's just that this idea that as a pastor or as a church, you need to have a bank account and you need to be saving and investing. No. You have to be selfless. You have to have that sacrificial, selfless nature. Okay? You need to be selfless. And you need to be sent by God. Okay? A lot of big churches we know today, if you look at the way they were set up, you can clearly see they were not inspired. Either they were doing a business before that became a ministry, or some other, odd process. Or maybe it's a woman who sets up the church instead of a man, because, read verses like 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 34 to 35, and 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 to 15. It is men who, set up churches and, carry forward the gospel to the world. Of course, women can teach their fellow women, according to Titus chapter 2, verses 3 to 5, and so on. But, so if those rules are not followed, it doesn't matter what becomes of that church or of whatever it is that's being set up, it's wrong. Because if you want God to be present in anything, rules have to be kept to. Rules have to be respected. So that is what I want us to think about when we're looking at Ezra chapter 2, verse 62. Because they wanted God to be a part of what they were doing, they had to consider his rules. Similarly, if you want God to be a part of your life, then what are the rules he said in Scripture? What are the things he allows? And what are the things he does not? The things he does not, you cannot find a reason to allow those things. Like, for example, in a lot of Christians who are sympathizers with, homosexuals as an example, they find ways of twisting the Bible to try to, to try to make it right. Okay? Whereas the Bible's obviously against it, like 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 10, Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22, and Romans chapter 1, verses 28 to 32. So if you want God to be present in your life, then his rules just have to be respected. If you don't respect them, then God won't be there. And it will be Satan who will fill that gap. Okay? So I just wanted us to keep this in mind. That's why I decided to pick this verse out and talk about it today. So if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you click the like button, if you subscribe to the channel, and if you click the notification bell so that when we come out with tomorrow's video, you will be the first to know. Okay? Have a great day, and I would like to see you in the next video.